Welcome back to week 5 of SOS, our Summer of Scripture series for the youth group at Crosspoint United Methodist Church. We took last week off so that you guys could catch up on your reading, and we are in week 5, chapter 5 of the Gospel of Mark today. So why don't you go ahead and hit pause, but instead of just reading chapter 5, if you'll remember in our last video, we didn't read the last story at the end of chapter 4. So beginning in verse 35 is the story about the disciples and Jesus in a boat during a storm. So I want you to start at chapter 4, verse 35 of Mark and read that passage till the end of the chapter and then read through chapter 5. Chapter 5 is long, so if you'd rather just watch this video and then go read those stories, you're welcome to do that. But either way, just do a little bit of reading first. All right, now that you have read those stories, I want you to think about math class. Not high school math, not even middle school math, just really basic stuff. I want you to remember how you learned how to put together equations, or we might have called them number sentences. Do you remember that? You learned what different symbols meant, like the plus sign, the minus sign, the equal sign. And then we learned greater than and less than. Do you remember those? They kind of look like arrows. And we practiced those symbols with numbers. So we would learn that 10 is greater than 5, 100 is greater than 99, 3 is less than 10, and so on and so forth. So remember, when we were reading stories about Jesus from the Gospels, the question is always, what does this tell me about Jesus? Because the Gospels are really like one of our best accounts, our best witnesses to who Jesus is. So what does this tell me about Jesus? So for me, it tells me that Jesus is greater. Jesus is greater than the storms in my life, whether they're real storms with thunder and lightning and wind, or they're stressful moments or chaotic situations. Jesus is greater than the storms. It tells me that Jesus is greater than the demons in my life. Maybe they're not actual demons. Maybe it's more the stuff that haunts me at night, my regrets, the things that I feel guilty about, my sins. Maybe it's your addictions. Maybe it's just stuff that haunts you emotionally or mentally. Jesus is greater than that. These stories tell me that Jesus is greater than my physical problems, greater than how I suffer. And that last story tells me that Jesus is greater than death. And the disciples knew that long before he was crucified and put in a tomb and then was raised 3 days later. Way back at this point, they knew that he was greater than death. So the thing about the greater sign is that we tend to flip it. I mean, we might say that Jesus is greater than all these things because it's the Sunday school answer, right? Because we know it's the right answer. But we don't really live like that. We tend to live like things are really big and hard in my life, and they're probably bigger than Jesus. And Jesus just wants me to be nice and probably not cuss, right? Or not drink, right? But Jesus can't really make an impact on these big things. So these big things are greater than Jesus. See, what would happen if we had the faith of that bleeding woman in chapter 5, or the faith of the centurion? What if we weren't like the disciples in the boat who thought this storm is bigger than Jesus, bigger than what's going on? What if we were more like the bleeding woman or the centurion who said, you know what? I think this man is greater than this disease I have, greater than my child who is dying, greater than my circumstances. What if we had that faith? What if you had that faith? See you next week.